Today we're going to be working on the 1969 Mustang, and we're going to be removing the power steering system from it. We're going to take it apart, we're going to inspect it, and then we're going to replace what needs to be replaced. There's a few things that are broken on it, there's a few things that need to be replaced that are worn out, and we're going to go through it pretty much piece by piece. So let's go ahead, let's jump into it. So on my 1969 Mustang, originally came with power steering. And on this car, with the power steering, I used a lot of original parts when I was putting it together. And a lot of them are starting to wear out, and they probably need to be replaced or rebuilt. Now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna look at this pretty much part by part. I got a bunch of new parts, so we're gonna end up replacing a few different things. I have another original power steering pump that we're gonna be putting in for this one. I have the power steering cylinder underneath the car that we're going to be replacing, and a few other linkage components. Now last year we did a video on an issue on the power steering where the power steering cylinder actually was starting to back out because the cotter pin wasn't in the captive nut. So with that, I come to realize probably should go through the entire power steering system and look at kind of what the issues are. Now, there's a few things that I've been noticing. One, that got remedied. We need to fix that. Second, I noticed that when I'm steering the wheel, it's starting to get a little bit harder at some points when I'm steering it. I've also noticed that the power steering fluid is leaking at one of the connections on the car. I believe it's the one on the back side of the pump, so we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna address that. So we also have another pump for it. It's the same original style, but you'll see on the back of the can, it's actually the return line is pointing in another direction, which is probably gonna be better for this car. That's the return line can that should be on this car, so we're gonna end up replacing that too. All right, so first, we are leaking fluid from the power steering pump, and that is probably coming from the back of the pump. So the way that our power steering is set up, as you can see I have a towel in here to catch some of the fluid, is you have a power steering pump here, which essentially is connected to the water pump in the center. Now with our green towel back there, you can see the return lines actually coming back this way and around and under. That's because this return line is actually pointing up where it's not supposed to be pointing up. Now that's one thing that I need to take care of. And the other thing is, looking at kind of this, it's hard to see, but it's not perfectly aligned. So I need to figure out what I need to do here for spacers that's gonna allow this to sit correctly. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna loosen this. I'm gonna take off the belt, then I'm gonna take off the pump, and then we'll go from there. All right, so we got the pump out. We have the replacement pump here. We gotta take the pulley off of this. So the way that we're gonna take the pulley off of this is to use a Pittsburgh pulley removal tool. So the way that this tool works is essentially it wraps around here. So on the nose of this, and then it just pulls it straight out. I'll show you. Let's go ahead and zoom in. Okay, so I have this tool here. So essentially you're gonna take two halves of this and it's gonna go over and close on top of it. You need to find the side that it closes all the way, or almost all the way, so not that way. You can see they're different halves, different sides. So it'd be this way. So essentially it's gonna close on top of it like that. Now we're gonna take this, and we're gonna close it inside there. Then we're gonna put this ring on it to make sure that it doesn't come apart. So now that it's apart, you can see this is going to pull it apart. But before I do this, I'm actually gonna grease this up because I haven't had any luck with these, with the other tools that I've been working with, and they've broken. So I should be able to just take this, tighten it, and it's gonna start pulling. Now with this being on the car for the past, or being together for many, many, many years, I doubt it's gonna come apart easy. So we're gonna crank down on this, which means safety glasses. Because I do not want this to fly anywhere. It's really, really tight in there. Great. We're gonna make the assumption that it's moving. It is, I can see it sliding out slowly, which is great. But you also need to use this tool to put it back on. So that is one thing to remember. But I can definitely see it sliding. There we go, we got it off. So we're gonna end up cleaning this off. I believe it's an original pulley, but we're gonna reuse this and we're either gonna put it on this can or we're gonna clean off this one and use this. So let's go ahead, let's take a look at the difference between these two cans before we decide which one we're going to use and work on the pump. Okay, here are the two power steering pumps that we're going to be working with. And you can see that, looking at them from the front, they look the same. There really isn't too much different, especially when we're talking about the pumping mechanism. Now, what does make them different is the can that they have. So flipping both of these over, there are part numbers on them, and we'll clean these up so we can see what the part numbers are on them. But you can see that the exit ports on each one of these go in a different direction. So there's this one here, which is off one car, which was on my Mustang, which goes up and away from the engine block. This one here goes out and down. So this is the return line, and this is what we're going to be looking at and what we're going to be replacing. So my plan is, right now, it's either to clean up both of these cans and then decide which one I'm going to use, or it's going to be completely rebuild the pump and switch over to this one. Now, to take these apart, I'm hoping it's as easy as just removing these nuts in the back, and then this can should slide back. There's probably an O-ring in here that's holding it together. So let's go ahead, let's start taking these apart. Now, there's no way that this was leaking from the back here just because of how tight it was. So to get these off, I'm going to take off both of these nuts. Now with all these nuts off, I should be able to just take this off. It's a tight fit, but work it back and forth till it comes loose. Okay, so one apart. Two. Now on the back of each one, there's actually a washer here that is broken on both. So there's one on the other one, which just came off like this. And then there was another one. It's not really a washer. It looks like more like a gasket or gasket material. So this is a good chance of why it was leaking. So we might actually end up just using the same pump and just putting everything back together, just with a cleaner can. All right, so here's a drawing of my understanding of what the pump looks like, and we can take a look at this pump over here. So specifically where I think I'm leaking was out from this port in the back. I originally thought that this wasn't on tight enough, the hose that goes on the back here, but there's actually a gasket, and you can see this one that's still there, kind of. There's a gasket that's in between this and the back pans. So you can see, essentially it's the pump, there's this gasket between them, and then the can on the outside. On both of them, the gasket is completely broken, but with the rebuild kit that I have, it does come with a new gasket, so I can use that gasket and should be able to be okay and shouldn't leak. So we're gonna go ahead, I'm gonna paint the outside of the can, and then we're gonna put everything back together, get it back on the car. All right, so everything's sandblasted, everything's looking pretty clean. I'm gonna go ahead and hit this with some carburetor cleaner, brake cleaner, make sure all the oil and everything's off of it, make sure there's no walnut shells left, and then we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna paint it. Now when we paint it, we're gonna go with color Deep Ford Blue, engine paint. So we talked about previously that the gasket was probably the issue. So I do have a new gasket. We're going to put it on and make sure it seats all the way down. Then we're going to use that for this pump. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get this reservoir back on. So this nut here is around 43 to 47 foot-pounds, I believe, when you put it on. So I'm gonna first go ahead and figure out how this all fits together before I tighten it down. So this bracket only goes on here in one direction. So I wanna get this bracket on before I tighten that down, just because I wanna make sure everything's lining up correctly. Now with this bracket on, this pump should be around this area. So the right side is gonna be at 15/16. going to take this and I'm going to ratchet it down till we're at 45 foot-pounds. I'm going to try to keep it in the area where I've been. And we're on. Okay, now with that in place, this pump's pretty much ready to go on. It looks significantly, still leaking fluid. It looks significantly better than before. All right, now we're gonna get this back together. To do this, I'm gonna be using the pulley remover and installer set. You can get them from Harbor Freight, you can get them from Amazon. If I can, I'll link one in the description. I'm gonna take this small pin here, I'm gonna put this small pin inside first. Then I'm gonna take some grease and lubricate everything up. So I'm gonna add a little bit of lube to the shaft. Then I'm gonna add plenty of lube to this. So this is gonna sit on top of here. First, I'm gonna put this inside here. With that in place, this will go next. Then, probably should have put the lube further down. Goes the washer, the bearing, and then the giant nut that goes on here. Should be able to just take it, push it back into place. It's gonna push it until it's flush, or I'm just gonna make sure that it goes flush and no further. We are in place now. All right, we're all flattened out. Everything's in place. This is pretty much ready to go back on the car. Now, it looks really good. The only thing that I'm noticing is there is a slight place here where it wasn't painted before. I'm wondering now that I have it torqued on, oh, it doesn't look like the can is on evenly. Now, one of the things I noticed while installing this can, it wasn't evenly going on as I was expecting. Now, the reason this is probably because that gasket's a little bit on the older side. I did lubricate it. You know, one of the things you should watch out for is while you're tightening that nut, make sure that the can is moving all the way with it so that it's even. I did end up refilling this with power steering fluid. I've actually filled it up so that I can take measurements of it and to see if any's leaking out of the can before I install it in the car. So far, so good, nothing's leaking out. But one of the things I had to do after I installed it is I actually took a rubber mallet and hit the edges of this to kind of reinstall it and make sure that everything was even and to make sure it's going over that gasket. Now, that's one thing to watch out for as you're installing this before you put it on the car. All right, so now we're going under the car. Now we're going to be replacing this power steering ram here. So it's a cylinder. It helps push everything back and forth so that your car steers much easier. Now I have this drop on mine because I'm running long tube headers, but you can see here what I was talking about, what broke before is that there's no cotter pin in there and there should be a cotter pin for that castle nut. So the way mine is set up right now, I have two nuts on here being used as a jam nut to hold it in place so it doesn't back out, and that is not correct. So let's go ahead, let's take this out. I do have a new power steering ram if we need it. Or we can see if we can fix this one, because this one does work. So out we go. Now to take this out, gotta take these two nuts off here. You should only have one if you're doing it yourself. Then need to take out these two connections and then that cotter pin nut up on the front. And then this should just pull right out as long as it's still free. But I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna crack both of these first just to get this fluid draining if there's any more in them. Now I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off this one on this side that goes into the valve, just because it'll help me remember which one goes where. So with both of those lines off, I can go ahead and take off these nuts and drop off the cotter pin up there. Now I do have extras of these cotter pins, so if I destroy this one, it's not a big deal. This is something you probably should keep a lot of extras of. All right, it's a little dark under here, but we're gonna try this ball joint tool to see if we can use it to pop that out. If this works, I'll link the tool in the description. So the ball joint tool did work to take this out. Just put a lot of pressure on this end here and it just popped out. It did shoot out pretty hard. Now, if you do that, make sure you have your safety glasses on and you're holding this because it's gonna shoot out and it's not gonna easily go out. So it's just gonna break free. then propel itself away. All right, so we got the part out. We can take a look at it now. We have the new boot kit that goes with this one. It comes separately, but first thing I'm realizing is I actually think this is probably a reproduction part and not an OEM part. I don't see any Ford part numbers on it. And one of the other things I'm really noticing about it is, this one does have an area here for the cotter pin to go through in the casting nut. This one does not, and it doesn't have one at all. So it's not like it's broken off, it's just, it isn't there. So that means, since this essentially isn't ideal for me to install, I'm gonna put this one on the car. So now that this is out, all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna install a new boot on it, and then I'm gonna put everything together, and then it's going right on the car. Now this one here is from AutoPro USA. It's a kit that I got off National Parts Depot. So easily enough to install this boot. I have to put this clamp on, which means you need a special tool to do it because you need to crunch it here. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna do all this. That boot is on. Doesn't look like there's anything that holds this into place. This end goes to here, and then we get to put it together. We're finally ready to get everything to go back in the car. All the parts are here. Everything is put back together enough so that we can just drop everything in, tighten everything, fill it up with fluid, check it out. So let's go ahead, let's look at how these are assembled. We'll put it back in the car, and that'll be it. All right, so here's everything back together. I ended up getting another kit from National Parts Depot for all the bolts. So all those are gonna get replaced with this. So for the power steering pump, this long stud's gonna go through. This end's gonna go into the head itself. That's gonna go all the way through. This is pretty straightforward to set back up. We'll use this bracket again, but I actually did end up putting fluid in it, just covering this off to make sure that it's not leaking, and it's not leaking, but this turned out pretty good and it's ready to go back in the car now. Now for the power steering cylinder underneath, so looking at this, it's all ready to go. I have these Nipex clamps that I'm gonna use to put this on as soon as I get it all lined up in the car, so I can figure out where this is gonna end up. So the way that this is gonna go in is gonna be this, then I've noticed that some of these actually come with an insert on the inside that it rides on. The one that was in it didn't have one, it was just kind of neck down and it went on the rubber. So I think these are the new ones because they haven't been used. I'm gonna try them out and add a little bit of grease to it just in case so that it doesn't rattle around a little bit. But that's gonna go on, that's gonna go on. So then the casting nut's gonna go on, and this pin's gonna go straight through holding the casting nut in place. Then everything will be locked down. I have nothing to worry about. So I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna start getting everything back on the car. All right, so we're gonna use this, I believe it's a Knipex tool to crimp that last boot on. Now with everything in place, we do have that boot right there that needs to be crimped. So to do that, I should be able to just take this and crimp it. We do not have a lot of room in there, so we're gonna see how this is gonna go. Probably should have just went with a normal hose clamp, but okay. Here we go. We are on and nice and tight and in place. All right, so I have everything together. Nothing's tightened up yet, but what I'm still noticing is, I put it back together with the new kit. This power steering pulley is still too far forward off of the water pump. So I don't like the alignment there. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to adjust it. So the way that I'm gonna change it is I'm actually gonna mill some material off of this here, so this piece, and then I'm gonna put a washer up front here. Let's go ahead and look at the parts that we're gonna modify. Since I did buy another one of these rods, these studs, I can just modify the one that's on my bench. Now, here's what we're gonna move back. So we're gonna use the thickness of this. So I'm guessing this is, it's about 0.1, and this is around 0.5. So I'm gonna end up taking off 0.1 off of this just so that it's the same. So if I take 0.1 off of this, off the back, add 0.1 to the front, it'll shift it back 0.1 of an inch. All right, so we got the part ready. We're gonna check it out. I'm gonna file some of the edges and we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna drop it in. You know, we're at, I have to come in, $3.99. So we're at pretty much exactly where we wanted to be. So it does feel good to make your own parts, especially with the finish this nice. Now the custom spacer is in, you can see it right there. Now with that in place, I had to put a washer up here just to kind of move it forward, but what you can see and what you notice is everything is now in line, or a lot closer to in line than it was before. So that solves one of those problems that I was having. So now we can go ahead, finish up down below. Well, everything's hooked back up. I have the right cannon. There's plenty of clearance now, so it's nothing I need to worry about. The power steering cylinder's been replaced with one that I know is not going to fall off because it has those cotter pins in it now, and I don't have to use a double jam nut. So everything's all set. Thanks for tuning into Smackey's Garage. I'll see you next time.